I was listening to a podcast of Tim Keller. Now, you know I love Tim Keller. And he's written a new book about pain and suffering. And it's not about pain and suffering that I want to chat. But he says, no matter what approach you have to life, to theology, your filter or your approach that you come from, you are always confronted by pain and suffering in all of them. He said some of them is sociology. When you look at that approach, when you look at it from a theological point of view, and then he said when you look at it from a psychological point of view, sociological, theological, psychological. He says no matter what approach you take, you can't get away from pain and suffering. It's always present in whatever. But it made me think that you and I probably look at things a lot more from a psychological point. We love to know that people are emotionally healthy, emotionally able to process life, restored in Christ, renewed in Him, in their minds, in their thoughts, in their emotions, in everything. We really love that part. But definitely I've devoted my life to the study of psychology. And it's one of my approaches that I take to interpretation. What were the people thinking? How were they feeling? I think about those things in the Bible where they speak about the woman caught in adultery, and my psychological filter comes out. And I think how embarrassed she must have been, how ashamed she must have been. One of the things you and I speak about is the guilt and shame that God removes so we can be free. So in reading some of the prophecies, and this is my challenge to talk to you, is in 1991, one of the earliest recorded prophecies over this church that has been preserved is from Rob Rufus. And it says, in the past, we all had one qualifying reality. We had felt disqualified by our failures and by our flaws and by our mistakes. But you now have in this church a people who know what it is like to be rescued by the grace of God. Yes, for most in this church have not fallen before we were saved. Most have fallen since we are saved. Not necessarily true anymore, but there's a great deal of where people came to God and then, according to standards, stuffed up. The very thing we thought had disqualified us has qualified us to be part of the church of encouragement. You have lifted the spirit of shame, the spirit of despising and despair. It's off of us, and you put on us the spirit of reconciliation, dignity, gentleness, and compassion. You have lifted the stigma of the past, and you have declared that you are proud of this church. You are proud of us as a people, proud to call us your own. You are not ashamed of us. And I think how amazing it is that God brings you and I as a couple to lead in this season. We will never be the couple that brings the church into complete fulfillment of that. But there's a degree of that I can see. If I look at the design, you and I carry that in our hearts. How are you going to carry that to people that you interact with?
I think I've been very confronted in even the last couple of weeks in lockdown, how everything that we do needs to be out of a place of love. And I think the way that we carry that to people is not necessarily to look at their whatever they're so broken in. Like you say, those filters that we look through. But I'm trying to look through these filters of love that God is asking us to look through. The way that He would see people. The way that He would look at people. And I often think of that story in the Bible as well about the woman caught in adultery. And how exactly what you said, like how she must have felt and how she must have been so embarrassed and how she must have thought, this is my moment for death. And yet Jesus comes and He sees her through a filter of love. He sees her through a filter of grace. And I feel we are approaching a season, and as you said, it's no mistake that we are here, because I feel like God saw us through a filter of love and through a filter of grace. And as he saw us or allowed people to come into our lives to look at us with those filters, it helped us to walk more and more into what he has for us. And I feel that is what God is going to do. As we look through the filters of love and grace at people's lives, rather than right and wrong, let's put it that way, but the filters of grace and mercy and wanting to help people be better and walk better, I think we are going to help people see that and reach that place more and more.
Now, you and I do believe in second chances. We are testimonies of that.
Second chances.
That's right. But there are certain things that offends us. When I'm confronted by somebody that's done that one thing that I deem unforgivable, we're going to be challenged by that. What are you going to do? I don't want to mention the one that I know about you. What are you going to do when you have to confront that person that in themselves, because of that sin, that choice, that stuff up, feel so disqualified? How are you going to be fulfillment of this prophecy that God has spoken over this work?
I don't completely know. I have been thinking about that a lot in the last month. Because I do feel for that exact thing that you're speaking about, I've stuffed it up with someone. I've not been that filter of grace. And in some ways I'm trying to justify it because I'm trying to say, but right is right and wrong is wrong as well. But I've just felt Jesus say to me, or Holy Spirit say to me, where is your filter? Where is that filter of love? And honestly, I don't really have the answer. I don't know how we're always going to do that when we're confronted with the things that we are probably, if we can call it prejudice to, or things that are hard for us to grasp, or things that might have happened to us in our past and we kind of don't want to go there again and we don't want to face it with other people because it's just too hard. And I don't have all the answers to that. But I know that God is asking us to explore this. And I think if we just start by saying, God, we are open to explore. We are open to start adjusting our filters. We are open to say sorry when we've stuffed it up with someone, to go to that person and say, I shouldn't have responded that way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's where I'm standing on that at the moment.
Yeah, because we all will be confronted by things that for us is just too black. Yeah. There's just no gray. And I am at the same time excited that God is trusting us with the broken and the bruised and the disqualified. And at the same time, I'm
petrified.
I am.
Yeah, me too.
I am. Because I know that we are some of the people that see the person more than we see the sin. But sometimes I don't see the person, I just see the sin. It's a tough one for me. And I thought about the other day when we go to churches and we speak about them starting to engage with the hot topic, the same-sex attraction. And we say to them, know your own prejudice as the first thing. How would you open dialogue with people, with leaders, to say, know your own prejudice? How did you get to the point where you learned some of your prejudice?
I think for me, knowing your prejudice always just starts with actually engaging the topic. I think often we say we need to recognize our prejudice, but we don't actually do the exercise. We don't sit down and actually say, what is that for me? And put it pen to paper.
I don't like blue. I think blue is an unforgivable choice of color. And if you have ever chosen blue, I write you off. So your approach would be, okay, I admit I don't like blue. But can I like some shades of blue?
I don't know. I feel like it's a trick question. I don't know how to answer that. You see, I don't even think people get to a place where they ask the question, do I like blue or not? I don't even think we are on the shades of blue yet. We haven't even gotten to a place where we just say, am I willing to admit that I hate blue that much? And I think that's where we need to start. We can't start looking at the nitty-gritties of it if we can't just sit down and say this. I remember when we were studying in Cape Town, when we did our counseling course, and we did that one evening as a group. We had to sit down and say, what is your prejudices? And it was such an uncomfortable thing for me to do. I hated it. Because we don't want to admit that about ourselves. We want to think that we are all like Jesus, that can sit in the gray areas of people's lives and be okay with it. But there was so much that I needed to admit in that place. And so much since then that God has exposed. But I think because I've allowed myself to ask the question, it has become a lot easier to sit with the uncomfortableness of my own heart. And it's become a lot easier to then say, okay, how do I approach it, even if I don't have the answers?
I like the one thing you always say is, are we comfortable to sit with people in their mess, like Jesus did?
Yeah.
Not saying I'm enjoying the mess. Not saying I'm choosing the mess and I'd love to stay here and can I also just participate in the mess, but at least going to them and saying, what a lovely mess. Come, there's a better option.
And I think sometimes if we don't go and sit with people where they are, we will never know how they are feeling, how they are truly doing. If we are always outside of I always imagine it as like a big mud puddle that they are stuck in and lying in.
Yeah.
And if I'm always standing on the outside of that, I will never know what it feels like. Because the reality is I was there once, but we kind of forget what the mud is like when we're not in the mud anymore.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to allow ourselves to just go and sit with people, not to be sucked in. That's not what I'm saying. Not to say that this is an okay place to be, but just to grasp understanding and have grace for that place, for us to then pray better, even if we don't help them in that moment, but to pray better and to intercede for them better, because we are understanding again how people are feeling. I don't know.
I remember when I was little, and Sanita and I played in the mud. And I remember having a photo of me wearing a white onesie, I don't know, for lack of a better word. And I was covered in mud because she had pushed me into the mud and smeared it all over me. I remember being scrubbed, but still not coming clean. I was in the bath and it came off. But like for days after that, I still had mud and sand stuck under my nails. And on my one part of my arm, I had almost like a stain that was muddy. But eventually it faded. And eventually my nails grew and the dirt came out from under it. And I think sometimes that's just what we need to help people, is get them into the bath first. Before we say you have to have all things removed from you, because sometimes it's a process. If you think about it from a psychological point, sometimes people need retraining in their thinking, in their behavior.
And I also think the Bible refers here to that renewing of the mind. I think this is a part of it, is to teach people, yes, by the word of God, to renew their minds. But sometimes people don't even know how to go there and how to do that, because they, within themselves and within their own thoughts, they're in such a deep and such a dark place, and often so overshadowed by the shame, the guilt, the fear, the disgrace, that they actually cannot see past the next hour. And if we don't engage people in that place where they are and what they are feeling in the moment, and what they are experiencing beyond the feelings. Because I know it's not all about feelings. That's not what I'm trying to say. But if we don't have an understanding, I believe that Jesus understood how people felt in their moments of greatest fear, greatest tribulation, greatest sin, greatest moment of, wow, I did this. He understood how they felt. And he always engaged people in that place with questions.
Oh, well, for some of them it was
Conversation.
miraculous provision, miraculous deliverance. We're not saying that's not possible.
Absolutely.
But for some people, it's a journey. For all of us, there is a degree of a journey, isn't there?
And many times he posed questions to
Yeah.
people. If you think of I think it was the rich man that said he had done
Yeah.
everything. And then Jesus puts this one thing in front of him, like sell everything and come and follow me. And he wasn't able to. And I think often Jesus does that for us or with us. He gives us that thing, that thing that's so hard. And if we're not ready, he'll wait for us. I believe that. But he never stops engaging us.
Never gives up, eh?
Never gives up. And I think we give up on people a lot quicker than he actually does.
Yeah, let's just be grateful that we're not God, eh?
Oh, thank you, Jesus. Yeah.
I also find it interesting. I remember a conversation about somebody wanting to participate in some expression of ministry in a church. And the leaders spoke about it. And one of the things they said is that, unfortunately, because his spouse was in a bad state, the guy couldn't participate in ministry. And because he had to focus on his marriage. And yes, it is a valid thing. As a leader, you cannot fault that sentiment. But then a week or two later, somebody was with that guy where the spouse had again succumbed to the sin of addiction and had fallen. And here the guy is sitting, wiping his wife's face, cleaning vomit, brushing her hair, saying, there, come on, we can do this, let's get up again. All of a sudden you are confronted with there is a definite right answer to it. No, the person should focus on his marriage, and yes, he should. But just changing the perspective to seeing him give vent to the vows that he made in the marriage, to love for better or for worse, lovingly covering the spouse's nakedness, restoring her, telling her that he loves her and she's beautiful, picking her up again, makes me feel like I want to learn from that person rather than say they need to take time off to focus more on the marriage. I think sometimes our perspective becomes jaded by what we've been exposed to and by not seeking God's perspective on things. So I believe for us to walk in some degree of fulfillment of this prophecy, we need to constantly, in every case, pursue God's perspective. And it's going to be exhausting, but it's what He has entrusted to us. Being the dad of 6 and you're the mom of 6, wouldn't it make it a safe environment when you know your kids can grow up in a place where the leaders pursue God's perspective on people in the church's lives?
Absolutely. I think I've loved seeing that in our community, especially I look at Levi and Grace, who's older now and have more questions about life and things that they are working through. And it's been so encouraging for me to see how they are able to go to other people than just you and I, to stand with them and to seek God with and for their lives. But what I'm also picking up from what you're saying, just listening to that story of that person, is the leader was there to witness that moment with that wife and that husband. And that speaks for me about a vulnerable community. It's not just about us being able to seek God for people, but that we actually are
Seeking God with people.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's not like we are sitting in a place where, like we are hearing God for people's lives and we are telling you what to do, because that is not what leadership is. Jesus' leadership was always, he knew people. He understood people. Before he expected anything of Zacchaeus, he was with him in his home. He told him to come down from the tree. He didn't go and pray somewhere in a room for Zacchaeus' life.
Yeah.
He sat with him. He experienced him. He engaged him in his sinful spots, in his not so sinful spots, in his hospitality. And as leaders, we have to live vulnerably with people. Them with us and us with them. I believe that is what it will be, the strength of having those moments where we don't become that jaded because we have actually seen someone in that place.
I think what you are touching on is where Jesus said, do not just commit adultery, but don't even go and think of committing adultery. Like Fran said in her message, he makes the law even more impossible to keep, and then he tells you to keep it. Yeah. I think that's what he's doing. He's like, don't just love your neighbor. You shouldn't just think about it. You should now go out and do it. He's doing the same, not just in the bad thing, avoid doing that. He's also demanding of us a greater thing that needs to happen for his love to reach the community.
Yeah.
Which is something to consider.
I think of the example that you often use with our children. When one of our children come to us and they say, for instance, Dad, should I buy pizza for the family? And your response is always like, you don't need permission to be generous. If you want to be generous, just be generous. You don't have to ask permission for that. And I think it's the same scenario here. For us to be with people and to love people, we don't need permission to love people. We don't need to say someone, let me know if you need me. Let me know if I should pray. We should rather just be there and engage in people's lives. Take the risk and engage, and take the risk and pray, rather than saying, do they really need my prayers? Do they really need me to stand with them? If we are going to be generous with our lives and with our leadership and with our vulnerability, we should just do it. It shouldn't be this thing of, should I or shouldn't I?
Kind of makes sense that Jesus didn't first say, can I give my life for you?
Yes.
He just did it.
He just did it.
He just gave everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
At the risk of not being accepted.
Yeah, that's always the truth.
And that is the truth that we face as leaders. Are we okay to be rejected in our leadership and in our maybe being vulnerable with people and our being there for people or wanting people to engage with us as well? Are we okay with the rejection? And we should be if we are looking at people through the filter of love.
I'm wrapping up with the first part of this prophecy from Rob in 1991. You have named over the mantle of this church, the church of encouragement. For even as Barnabas was known as the son of encouragement, so we will be known. And it's easy to shout at somebody to do something. But when you're with them and say, come on, you can do this. Sometimes you get sweat and mud and stuff on you. But that's what it's going to take if we want to walk in the fulfillment of what God has spoken over this. I'm quite grateful to have you with me.
Me too.
To do this. But
to be with you.
let's hope our leaders catch this and live in it.